Hi everyone, Thierry ARYS RUIZ here, founder and CEO of AgAu, AGAU, one token backed by silver, one token backed by gold. We're here at the WTO, the World Trade Organization Public Forum. It's a very good platform for public sector, private and academia. There's different takeaways about this. The first one takeaway is about globalization. The second takeaway is about trade wars and currency wars. And the third one is basically a call to action. So let's go through that. The first one is basically that, taking it in reverse, at the end of the day, the World Trade Organization is just as powerful as the member states. So the initiative has to come from the member states. Of course, you have a different guidance that can be done. It's a good platform to share best practices of what can happen, but the initiative has to come from within the states. And that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway about trade wars and currency wars, unfortunately, in history, you've seen that usually when you start currency wars that turn into trade wars, and trade wars sometimes turn into full-blown-out wars, and I think that's in no one's interest at the end of the day. So, in order to avoid that, you see a lot of people saying globalization on the one side and localization on the other side. I don't believe we're going to go back from globalization. Most likely, we're going to continue this trend of globalization and collaboration, but maybe perhaps a decentralized globalization. And what I mean by that is that perhaps the local economies will be further integrated in this globalized world, but perhaps they'll have a better say when it comes. So essentially, since the end of the 80s, you've seen a lot of supranational entities, and the government sometimes has bottleneck. Now, if we decentralize a little bit more democratically this governance, where the local players can also have a say, that's kind of a trend that we can see play out. So I'm rather optimistic on the globalization. I just believe that the governance might change from a globalized perspective into a localized perspective, and more free market of ideas in a way. So that will allow for smaller participants to also bring their ideas and bring their best practices into the players. And I think Switzerland is one of them, to be honest. So, talking about currency wars and trade wars, in terms of currencies, you've seen news of the SNB, the Swiss National Bank, partnering up with the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, central bank of central banks. Usually, it's interesting to say that the Swiss National Bank wants to do a digital Swiss franc. Now, the digital Swiss franc will play out through the SDX. The SDX is a spin-off of the SIX Group Swiss exchange, where they will be essentially playing this digital Swiss franc within a kind of a confined environment. It's kind of like a sandbox where it will play out first. But that's one initiative. The other initiative is on the other side of the Atlantic, Facebook Libra, right? Facebook Libra. Also, they established this association here in Geneva. I believe for the regulatory framework. Facebook Libra, I call it a digital SDR. So the SDR is special drawing rights from the IMF. It's a basket of currencies. Usually the IMF, what they do is that they lend to countries in SDRs, and then they get paid back in gold. Now, I always say, do what they do, not what they say. How does that play out with the threat? I think the Congress will probably accept this initiative. It's another way to keep the dominance of the US dollar through the SDR, and because the US dollar is still very heavy on this basket of currencies. Only very recently you've seen the Chinese renminbi being included in that basket, and it's taking a little bit more room in order to gouge for the push for China. And now Chinese is the second biggest economy, so of course they want to take more leadership, and this is a 100 years play out. Now, talking about China, they have completely banned digital cryptocurrencies, right? But they're pushing their own digital renminbi. The PBOC is now opening up through that digital renminbi. Most likely they will try to implement it in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the problem with that is the digital renminbi is kind of like a Hotel California, right? You can get in, but you cannot really get out. Now, those countries who are in between right? They don't want to have two masters, the dollar on the one side or the digital SDR on the one side, and then the Chinese renminbi on the other side. So talking about Facebook Libra, one of the interesting pieces is that you've seen that the IMF with Christine Lagarde has moved from the IMF to the ECB now, so that leaves an empty spot at the IMF. Mark Carney recently also said that the US dollar makes sense, but the basket of currencies would also make sense. Now, taking all of this into consideration, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets offered this position at the IMF. But maybe if you have a choice, right, between being at the IMF or joining Facebook Libra, right, and capitalize on your profile, previously being the governor of the Bank of England and before that the governor of the Bank of Canada. If you want to capitalize on the private sector, you might join Facebook Libra and essentially implement this digital SDR idea of the IMF. So that's just a speculation, of course, but then that could play out in the next few months. At the end of the day, we are here at the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and really all it is how you can do trade facilitation. We've established standards for a couple of years now, with Incoterms starting and becoming a big success. But again, the WTO is only as powerful as their member states, so the push has to come from within, it has to come from the member states. But also I believe that academia and particularly the private sector has a big role to play. Probably the innovation will come from the private sector because you don't have to ask permission to innovate, and I believe this is a call for the private sector to step in and really collaborate further, share more with the governments and tell them what the good practices are. And at the same time, this is a call of comments, right? Tell me what you think of what has just been said. Share with the button below and comment and spread the love.